So why are the 1, 4 and 5 chords so popular in songs? If you learn the guitar, the chances are the first chords you'll learn will come in a group of 3. It might be a D, G, A, it might be a C, F, G, or it might be a G, C, D. But they'll usually come together as a group of 3. Why? Well, the simple answer is, as we all know, with these 3 chords you can play half the songs in the world, and with just a few more you can play most of the rest. Well, first off, in the cases I mentioned, the groups of 3 chords are essentially just the same. You have one root chord, which is the home key, the 1, and then there are 2 other chords formed from the 4th and 5th degrees of the scale, also known as the subdominant and the dominant. So in all our examples we're going to use C as the home key, which means the 1 chord will be C, and the chords on the 4th and the 5th will be F and G. The Hook Theory website analysed 1,300 popular songs and transposed them all into their equivalent in C major to see which chords were used the most. Here's the chart. As you can see, the C, F and G were by far the most used chords, appearing in roughly 70% of all songs. Interestingly though, the home chord of C wasn't the most used of the 3, but we'll get back to that in a moment. The most convincing explanation of why these 3 chords are so popular goes right to the heart of what sounds actually are. So sounds are waves that move through the air. The length of the wave, the distance between one peak and the next, determines the pitch that we hear, and the height of the wave determines its volume.
Actually, it's not really the height of the wave because sound waves are not transverse waves like water waves. They're actually longitudinal waves, which means the volume is determined not by the height of the wave, but by how bunched up the air particles get to one another.
Now, built into the nature of waves is the fact that some waves fit together and others don't. So a wave that is exactly twice as fast as another wave will fit together with it like this. When that happens, the waves reinforce one another, and it makes a pleasing sound. This one is what we know as an octave. And the sound is so pleasing that in every culture in the world, the 2 notes it produces are given the same name. We think of them both as basically the same note. So if we take a wave which we'll call the fundamental, and we look for waves that are twice as fast as it, 3 times as fast as it, and so on, we'll get what are known as the harmonics of that fundamental, or the harmonic series. And what's rather delightful is if you take the first 4 harmonics of a note, you get the following notes. A major chord. And so the sound of a major chord is effectively built into the sound of a single note. It's not really surprising it sounds so good. This helps us to understand not just why the 1 chord is so popular, because its sounds come direct from nature, but also the 5. If you remember, the 5 is the first new note to appear in the overtone series of the 1, so a 5 chord really is the first step we can take away from home. There's an added feature in that the middle note of the 5 chord is only the smallest step, a semitone, away from the root of the 1 chord. In C major, for example, the middle note of the 5 chord is B, just a semitone away from C. We call this note the leading note because it leads us back home. Moving from the 5 chord to the 1 chord has this tremendous feeling of anticipation and resolution. Partly because the 5 chord, as we've seen, is very close to the 1 chord, but also because of this leading note pulling the ear back to that home chord. It's kind of like holding a magnet very close to another one, and you can just feel it wants to reunite and clunk back together. This movement is so strong that it forms the backbone of all tonal music. It's known as the perfect cadence. And when you hear that 5-to-1 progression, you know you've landed back home. So the 5 is such a strong, powerful chord, it's not surprising it's known as the dominant. But what about the 4 chord? Well, that's a bit more tricky to explain. Firstly, if we look back at our C harmonic series, there's no sign of an F there, however high you go. One clue can be found in the fact that the F sits in relation to the C, exactly the same as the C sits in relation to the G. Another clue is in the name we give this chord, the subdominant. Now you might think, looking at it, that it's given this name because it's just a note below the dominant. But I think a more helpful way to think about it is that it's a reflection or an inverse of the dominant. It's the dominant below, if you like. I think this way of thinking about it gives us a useful metaphor for how the chord behaves. Many of the characteristics of the subdominant form a sort of yin to the dominant's yang. Where the dominant is strong, clear and bold, the subdominant is more subtle, gentler and less driven. If a dominant is a military march, a subdominant is a love song.
We've only just begun.
Another way of thinking about it is that where a move to the 5 is one generation along in the harmonic series, it's like a child of the 1. The 4 is more like a step back a generation, it's like a mother to the 1. And you can really feel this difference if you try to find the notes by singing the harmonic series. If you sing a C, you can already theoretically hear that offspring G within the note. It's already there. La. Whereas to find the F, the only way you could really do it would be to sing the C and try to imagine the mother F that gave birth to it. La. As you can see, when you play an F, there is a C on its second harmonic, so the connection is still very close, just like with G. But it's one that has to be uncovered rather than one that's immediately present.
All this is to say
that 4 and 5 act as different ways to take a single step away from the home chord, but each represents a very different kind of territory with a different feel. Taken as a whole, the 3 chords form a coherence. There is a home base and 2 contrasting but complementary ways to move away from and back to it. And I think this goes a long way to explaining the prominence of these 3 chords. It helps as well that between them they include all the notes of the C major scale, so any note within that scale that you sing will find a home within at least one of these chords. But why then would the home chord be less prominently used than the other 2? I think this comes down to the sense of tension and release that we look for in music. Music which just stays at home all the time, let's face it, isn't the most exciting kid to hang around with. So by spending more time out and about in chords 4 and 5, it just means when we finally do return home, it's that much more comforting.
Please subscribe to the channel by clicking that big circular thing on the right, and I promise I'll never sing again.